Hi, Shakira. Hi. Do you want to be on YouTube? No? Hello. My name is Dora Crow, and today I'm going to begin reading Chapter 1 of Winky and Wonder. Maybe Shakira will stay and listen. We'll see. You ready, Shakira? Yeah? Hey, Winky. This is fun. Watch me land in that puddle over there. Wonder jumped onto a raindrop dripping off of a leaf and rode upon it as it fell into a puddle. The impact created ripples in the water like waves in an ocean. Or so it seemed to Wonder, who was so small that a puddle would certainly seem like an ocean to her. Winky and Wonder had been leaping from raindrop to raindrop during a rainstorm as they traveled to the small town of Windermere. The storm ended and the sun was now shining brightly. The Whisper Children had reached their destination, but were still able to enjoy the droplets of rain, remnants of the storm. Winky slid down inside of a raindrop as it fell from a lamppost to where Wonder was floating in the puddle. "I hear voices over behind those bushes," he said, gesturing to the left. "Let's check it out." Winky and Wonder skipped along from puddle to puddle until they reached the bushes. Then they slid underneath. Peeking out from under the bushes, they saw two girls. The Whisper Children listened as one of the girls spoke. "There she is," said Carly in a hushed voice, nervously pointing at the elderly woman crossing the street. "They say she's a witch, Jody. She's always mean and grumpy and never smiles. Her name is Mrs. Thorson." Jody watched Mrs. Thorson as she headed toward the small grocery store. The old woman with sunken eyes walked with difficulty, and her gnarled hand shook as she reached for the door. But just before she placed her hand on the knob, the door opened and Mrs. Thorson lost her balance. Stumbling, she glared at the young boy who was rushing out the door. "You naughty boy!" she screeched. "You should watch where you're going." I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorson," stammered the boy. I didn't see you there." "Well, you almost knocked me over. I should hope you're sorry," she sniffed. Jody looked at Carly. I wonder why the old woman was so upset. He didn't mean to make her stumble. Carly shrugged her shoulders. "Everything bothers Mrs. Thorson. She's just plain mean." "Well, I can see why the little kids are afraid of her. She even makes me nervous. But my mother doesn't think she's so bad. My mom is always trying to convince me to bring cookies over to her house. She says the old woman is lonely." "Ha!" snorted Carly. "Of course she's lonely. She's such a grump. Who would want to hang out with her?" Jody wondered what it would feel like to be Mrs. Thorson, and began to feel a little sad. She didn't realize it, but her heart was trying to speak to her. "Jody, why are you looking like that?" "Huh? Like what?" "Like you almost feel sorry for that nasty old lady." "Well, I don't know. I guess I was just wondering what it would be like to be old." "Just forget about her. Let's go home." I have to pick up something from the store for my mom. I'll give you a call later tonight." "Okay." Carly flounced off, her ponytail swinging. "Talk to you later." Jody crossed the street and entered the small store. She quickly purchased the fresh-baked loaf of bread her mother requested, and then left immediately as she wanted to avoid running into Mrs. Thorson. Jody was only a few feet away from the store when she heard a loud crash behind her. Spinning around, she saw all of Mrs. Thorson's groceries on the sidewalk. Instinctively, Jody followed her heart, which told her to help Mrs. Thorson. Winky and Wonder looked at each other curiously. "She's obviously listening to her heart," Winky said. "I don't think our assistance is needed here." "Shh," Wonder whispered. "Watch what's happening." Winky looked on as Jody caught a rolling can of soup. "Give me that, you little thief!" demanded Mrs. Thorson, snatching the soup can from Jody. Jody was totally unprepared for Mrs. Thorson's reaction. Disgusted, Jody turned and walked away. "Suit yourself, grumpy lady," she said under her breath. "Wonder, Jody's leaving. She's not helping the old woman like her heart told her to." "I know, Winky. I must go speak to her heart. Come with me." Wonder spoke to Jody's heart. "Give the old woman another chance. Yes, she was wrong for accusing you of being a thief, but look at her again and you'll see she really needs your help. She's not as tough as she pretends to be. When you look at her, you will know what you already know deep inside your heart." Jody didn't turn around. She felt a little tug from her heart, but she stubbornly kept walking. "Come on, Winky," urged Wonder. "We have to get Jody to look at Mrs. Thorson. Jump with me onto that loose strand of Jody's hair. We have to pull on it with all our might to make her turn her head." Wonder and Winky leaped up and grabbed Jody's hair tightly. They pulled, and finally Jody turned her head. Jody saw Mrs. Thorson struggling to return the groceries into a broken bag. "She probably deserves her troubles," thought Jody. "She's so grouchy." Winky and Wonder gave Jody's hair a tremendous yank. "Ouch!" cried Jody, scratching her head. Jody looked at Mrs. Thorson again, and this time she looked directly at the old woman's face. Jody saw a tear running down her face, and Jody listened to her heart. And I just want to stop for a minute and just ask children to think about this. The old woman is acting pretty grouchy, and Jody's not feeling like helping her. But then she sees the tear on the old woman's face. And just want you to think about, why might the old woman be crying? You know, she sounds grouchy and mean, but then here she is crying. So just want you to think about why that may be. Running back to Mrs. Thorson, Jody said, "Hey, Mrs. Thorson, let me help you. I'm not a thief. I'm Claire Justin's daughter. My name is Jody." Mrs. Thorson looked up, wiping away a tear. "Thank you, Jody. I'm sorry I snapped at you. I guess I'm not used to young people being helpful these days." Jody wondered what she meant by that, but kept silent while she picked up Mrs. Thorson's groceries. "Would you mind helping me carry the groceries home?" Mrs. Thorson asked. "Well, okay, I can do that," replied Jody hesitantly. "But I'll need to borrow your phone when I get there so I can let my mother know where I am." "Of course you may use my phone, and thank you again for being so helpful, Jody." Mrs. Thorson's home was only a couple of blocks from the store, but it took a while to get there, for Mrs. Thorson walked very slowly. Wonder and Winky followed, traveling along on the smell of the fresh baked bread Jody had purchased. Winky laid back on the scent, his hands resting behind his head and one leg crossed over the other. "That was a close one, Wonder. Jody almost didn't listen." "Yes, and I'm still concerned. I think we should stick with Jody for a while." "I'm with you, Wonder." Winky took a deep breath, enjoying the smell of the bread as it swept them along. Mrs. Thorson and Jody were in Mrs. Thorson's living room. They had put away Mrs. Thorson's groceries, and Jody was anxious to leave. She had spoken to her mother on the phone, and her mother had encouraged her to stay and visit with Mrs. Thorson, but Jody was still feeling miffed about the way Mrs. Thorson had spoken to her earlier. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I'm going to need to put the rest of Chapter 1 on another clip. Oh, and the phone rang just on time, because I think I only can put 10 minutes on a YouTube video. So I'll be back. Thank you.